Was there a lightning bolt moment that, you're an entrepreneur, were you reading something and you just said, you know what, copper, I'm going to go after copper for the next 5 years, 10 years. These things take time, right? What was it?
Yeah, looking at the world from a first principles philosophy, the world is electrifying, energy is electrifying. All these things need copper. And then when you look at the supply side, unlike lithium or some of these other metals and commodities that people talk about, there's a very limited supply of copper, and you can't out-engineer copper right now.
Welcome back to another pod. Today we're discussing a topic that has been gaining momentum in the global economy and capital markets for a couple of years now, copper. The long and short of it, despite what's expected to be a surplus this year, it looks like we could be headed for significant supply deficits in the years to come. As the world transitions toward cleaner energy and advanced technology, copper has become an indispensable resource. Controlling large swaths of the global supply is as competitive as ever. Copper is the backbone of electrification, from renewable energy infrastructure to electric vehicles and even the 5G technology that keeps us all connected. Now here's the big picture. Multiple publications and agencies project that by 2040, global copper demand could climb roughly 50% or more from 2020 levels. This potential surge isn't just because of electric cars or renewable energy. It also has to do with the massive infrastructure being built globally to support emerging technologies, trade, and automation, which is why China is so deeply invested in being vertically integrated in copper's supply chain. Production challenges remain an issue in the copper market. Established copper mines are aging, ore grades are declining, and regulatory and geopolitical factors make developing new mines increasingly complex. From the exploration phase of discovery to actual production, it now takes roughly 15 years. That's wild. Industry experts are already calling for a potential supply deficit as early as 2025, which is expected to drive up prices. Today, I welcome Zachary Dolesky to the pod. He's a young entrepreneur with a background in finance and technology, and he finds himself today deeply ingrained in the copper industry. We're going to talk about why he chose to dive into the crazy world of commodities, and specifically copper, where he sees the metal's role in the future, the hurdles faced by exploration companies, and a lot more. So without further ado, Zach, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here. Now, Zach, I'm curious, before we delve deeper into the sector, I want to talk about your entrepreneurial journey. You've had quite a bit of success in the capital markets. Investors, are used to seeing a guy with gray hair, who's been in the mining space for 30 years, 40 years. What made you want to step into this wild and often volatile world of commodities, copper in particular?
Yeah, Alex, thanks for having me on here. So my background specifically has been professional investing in metals and mining, and then technology as well for about 5 years. And then I worked on my own technology business, which had quite a successful exit. And alongside that time, I had reinvested in a number of different projects and have been really following the mining and metals markets closely from a macro picture. And I feel like since the 08-09, we had about a decade of kind of lackluster performance. And now, gold all-time high, uranium, different assets really picking up. I felt the last few years has been a big opportunity. And what I see is potentially, a super cycle coming up in terms of these really core metals that are required to fuel all the growth in the other industries in the world. So that's really what got me excited and, got me into the space we're at now.
I know you're based in Dubai. You've got sort of a global perspective. When you look around the world, are you seeing, copper demand soaring?
Fundamentally, this is a metal that can't be out-engineered. Like we're seeing things like cobalt, nickel being replaced in terms of battery constituents. Copper, I think we're going to keep seeing demand moving down the line. And, ore grades are declining. Supply and demand is starting to shift into a very tight spot. So, here especially, we're seeing a lot more talk about it on the street and with other companies and markets.
So looking out 5 to 10 years, what do you believe is going to be the most critical factor? What's going to drive this market? Obviously, the EVs are going to play a big role.
I think it's just going to be this confluence of factors all tightening into one focal point. And I don't know if that is 3 years from now, 6 years from now, in under 10 years, but it's going to be a combination of really supply and demand. And the fact is there's just not enough new supply coming to the market. And the supply that there is, it takes 5 to 10 years, 15 years to bring these new mines and exploration projects to production. And the existing mines we have, they're down in terms of ore grades. What They were traditionally making 1.5% in terms of copper specifically. They're now down to producing around 0.5% in ore grade. So all that really, I think, will tighten up. And as everyone knows, there's a lot of demand coming down the line with data centers, AI, robotics.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think your thesis is on point. With respect to the miners and copper exploration companies, when is the interest going to pick up there? I know it takes forever to get a mine permitted and into production, but why hasn't the market sort of taken a liking to some of these juniors?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the junior market itself, right? It has its own whole set of dynamics. And we have things that come into play like capital structure with some of these businesses. A lot of them that have projects that, fundamentally they're not going to get to production and they're not going to be a viable resource. And what I see as a bigger opportunity is just diversifying and sticking out in a unique way. And what I think specifically, becoming more vertically integrated in the whole supply chain of copper. So instead of being just a pure play high risk asset, I think there's a big opportunity for companies to really get further down the supply chain. And that can include different developments in technology, different developments in actual processing, remediation, and even just the distribution of it globally. So, all these things, I think, with the supply and demand factors coming up, the actual integration of that will really pick up as well.
Right. Is that part of, your thesis in terms of what exploration companies need to do to sort of attract investment and drive interest in 2025 and beyond?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of names in the space, and I think other big components will be just great discoveries coming up. And you also have themes in South America where the political climate is changing a bit. So you have, for example, in Chile, a lot of land that's been staked and it hasn't been touched and worked on from a mining perspective. But the government just changed those rules. So what was originally maybe $25,000, $30,000 per year to hold this land, guys like yourself, myself, other, business people, lawyers, et cetera, would stake a bunch of land and just sit on it. But now we have the rules changing where if you're just sitting on it, you're going to pay about 10 times the price. So all this new land that's been staked for 5, 10, 20 years, we see it coming to market. And I think that will also be a unique differentiator. People that can really take advantages of those opportunities and just fundamentally bring value to the market, because that's what's all about, really.
That's a perfect segue because, exploring for copper is challenging. It's capital intensive, and you're playing this space in a very direct way. You're the CEO of Super Copper Corp, and I want to hear about that. But before we go any further, it's important to mention that Super Copper Corp is a client and sponsor of Pinnacle Digest and this podcast. It's an exploration company currently focused on the Cordillera Cobre project down in the Atacama Desert, northern Chile. I've actually been there. Beautiful place, amazing place, driest place in the world. Can you give us a rundown on the opportunity you see with this project down in Chile?
From the start, we have a very strong structure of the business, and it's majority founder and close partner owned. So we have a lot of management incentive to make this a big success. But predominantly on the asset, we have something very greenfield, virtually untouched, very light historical work. And it's in one of the best jurisdictions worldwide. There's a number of majors near our property. You've got Capstone Copper, which is multi-billion-dollar valuation range within a drive away. Lundin's Filo nearby as well. And this relatively interesting place that you've been to. So there's a lot of good infrastructure and a lot of unique just deposits and grade. And I think even for some viewers that might not be familiar, Chile is the number one producer of copper globally. They account for about 24% of the world's global copper. So it's really the place to be.
We flew into Santiago and then up the coast to Antofagasta. And, for Canadians and Americans that haven't been down there, think of a gold mining camp like, or just a mining camp like Timmins, on steroids. Like every other vehicle you see is, on the streets of Antofagasta is geared towards mining. I think it's one of the richest cities in the country, per capita, easily one of the most mining, friendly regions in the world. I noticed that, the structure in your deal. Do you want to just talk about that quickly?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, we put in our initial capital to get the project going and kind of de-risk those first stages. And, we raised a bit of capital at 10 cents, so about $300,000. And then the next financing we did at 20 cents, which was our kind of go public capital raise. And alongside that, we had no warrants, minimal options that have been issued. And basically, that gives us a very tight structure going to market. And if that's not set up at the beginning, it's hard to really build out the business. And that's what we want to do, is not just be this one copper exploration with one project. We have very big ambitions.
Now, you have an earn-in option on this project. Can you give us the high-level details on that? What's been spent? Where's the ownership at? What's required to earn in? What percentage, et cetera?
To get majority control, 51%. We have to spend approximately $2 million on project expenses. We're getting close to about a quarter of that being earned. We anticipate after our next drill program, we'll be at that 51% ownership position. And then we can buy out the remaining 49% for a fixed fee of about $2 million at any time after that. And the general idea is at that stage of 51%, we'll kind of know if it makes sense to buy it out or not. And ideally, we will. So pretty defined structure. We already own a good percentage of that. We're going to keep earning more over the next year until we get to majority. And at the same time, we're the managers of the actual rights and control. So, we're operating on a day-to-day in terms of making sure everything's progressing as we want.
Talk about the project, Zach, for a minute. Has there been any historical work done? You kind of mentioned it's, greenfield. I assume there's been no drilling. Just kind of give us a bit of an overview of where things stand from an exploration standpoint.
Yeah, it's been pretty light work to date. There was some light drill holes in 2008, 2009, just before the, that big market crash. And since then, it's been held pretty stagnant. So that's why I like to position it as basically a greenfield opportunity for us. And in December 2023, we went down with our whole geo team and did a systematic sampling program where basically we got some initial results, got everything sorted out, and we've hit 3 potential targets on our property that are getting kind of 1 to 2.5% copper grades. And our next stage of work is really delineating that. And that will be done in the next month or so and figuring out where we can drill. And that's really the next big milestone for us, is doing a fulsome drill program targeting first half of next year.
And were those just grab samples?
Yeah, just grab samples. All 3 of the potential targets on our property had good copper concentrations. And we have quite a sizable package too, about 7,400 hectares.
It's funny, like that region of the world is probably one of the most explored regions on Earth. Many of the largest mining companies in the world have operations there. So was it just continuously held by different geologists and they just never took a proper crack at it?
It was primarily held by one individual down there for, I guess, about 15, 20 plus years now. One group took a small crack at it back in that 08-09 cycle, but they did not drill deep enough, in our opinion, and our geo's opinion. Did a few holes, kind of 50 meters to 150 meters subsurface, not quite deep enough as well. And then those macro factors hit after that crash, and that never really continued on. So it went back to the original owner, and that's how it's kind of been held closely and relatively untouched.
Have you been down there and walked the project yet?
Yeah, absolutely. So December last year, so December 2023, was down there also with our whole geo team, which is led by Mike Dufresne. He's the founder of Apex Geoscience. So he has about 100 staff on hand at all times. They've done work internationally. He's personally been responsible for some big deposits, and he came down with us as well. And we walked the whole property. We did some more grab samples, which is where I referenced the 1 to 2.5%. And really just made sure we built the right relationships with parties on the ground as well.
So looking out, 3 to 6 months, what are some of your near-term goals that you guys hope to achieve with the project?
In about a week and a half here, I'm heading back down to Chile with the guys. Geo team's coming down, and we're doing a pretty fulsome systematic exploration program. So where there was about 6 samples on last year's trip, now we're going to do about 150, maybe up to 200 samples. We're doing all the geomagnetics. We've just acquired the hyperspectral data. So we're really locking in. And, we'll probably announce the results of this program in January, I would expect, sometime early Q1 2025. And then immediately after that, we're looking to drill as soon as possible. And that will be the next milestone. It'll depend, obviously, on the results we get, but that's kind of in the next 6-12 months plan.
So you're going to wait for all this data to come back and then start to look at, ironing out some drill targets?
Oh yeah, that's absolute priority. Right now we're putting money into the ground, and it's really where is the best, highest probability spot for us to put those drills in the ground. And that's what this trip coming up next week is for. And as soon as we get those results, we'll make some decisions and announce to the market alongside all the other things we're working on.
Now, drilling, conducting work programs on an exploration asset, is not cheap. It's a better region than many, but it's still going to cost a lot. Can you walk me through some of, what's your funding strategy over the next 2 years? What does that look like?
We've got a pretty close network of original shareholders and founding partners. So we anticipate some of the investors that have already capitalized the company to continue to reinvest. But the next drill program will cost approximately $1 million Canadian is what's anticipated based on current numbers. And that will give us maybe about 2,000 meters of drilling. That's kind of what we're looking at for an initial program there. We want to be careful with how we finance. And we'll probably do a small raise going into that drilling program. But, we have some good shareholders, as I'd mentioned, and we want to make sure we're very careful with the share structure itself.
So you mentioned some of the regulations around mining in Chile, holding, exploration assets in Chile. Can you talk about, how it's changed and your thoughts on the political climate there, and, the impact on exploration and mining?
The government has changed there, but I think the changes are actually very positive for us. So I think fundamentally, they're the world's number one producer of copper, and mining is really powering their economy, and they're not looking to hurt that in any way. I think they're looking to make it more efficient. So what you've actually seen recently with President Boric, he's brought down some of the times that are required and some of the red tape around permitting and actually getting new exploration into drilling and processing, et cetera. Like we had kind of talked about a bit, increasing the costs, but for people that aren't doing actual exploration work. So if you're just holding land and hoping you can flip it for a few bucks, yes, it's going to cost more. But I think for everyone that's active, definitely it's a good environment. This is a country that's really been efficient in terms of bringing in the biggest mining companies in the world and developing out massive deposits. So there's a lot of private investment. Some of the biggest private companies in the world are there. And, they're right in our province as well of Atacama. So I think that really speaks to it.
When we talk about, Codelco and some of these huge companies, I know, like you'd mentioned, like a lot of the grades are going lower and lower. Is there a couple properties nearby that, have seen their average grade come down after a long mine life?
Yeah, there's a few of the larger properties around, but we're a bit further south in Atacama region. So up north in Antofagasta, which you had mentioned you had been to, there's been a lot more development in that province historically. So some of those mines, they've been around for a longer time in terms of production. And now they're starting to see those ore grades come down versus down south. There's a few more of the, newer operators, newer developers, newer production stages, and they're decently good levels. So that's also an exciting element for us.
And how close are you to some of these deposits, like as the crow flies?
Within sort of 150, 200 kilometers, you have a few majors. Like I mentioned, Capstone Copper just north of us. Yeah. You've got Lundin Group nearby, NGX. And then I think what's also very interesting for our project in particular, we have some, smaller mines that are right on our border that are currently active and have been intermittently active, not, kilometers away. Literally, here's our borderline, here's another group, and they've been active for a number of years.
What type of scale? What is it copper? How much are they producing?
Yeah, it's a mix of copper and silver primarily has been the output from some of those mines. Most of them are private. So they haven't really disclosed too much information, but from being on the ground and, driving in and seeing them, and, we've met with some of the operators themselves as well, and they showed us around. They're definitely decent scale production sizes, more than one would think just on surface level.
Fascinating. So it's the Cordillera Cobre project, but how many hectares was it again?
It's about 7,400 hectares.
7,400 hectares. So as you're approaching the project, you literally are crossing the boundary, and right along the boundary, there's some production happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a slide in our presentation as well that shows some of that. But yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they also might know a lot about the geology and the land, and, it'd be very interesting to have some conversations with them. And
that's why, I want to be in the field as much as possible. I want to be on the ground there. And that's what we're doing, because nothing can replicate, going and meeting these operators, shaking their hand, explaining what we're doing, learning from them. And I think that's another differentiator for us. Like we're not scared to get right in there, spend every day and night just working on this.
I love that, man. When are you planning on going back?
About 8 days. Yeah, we'll do the back half of November down there. And out of that trip, probably, 8 to 10 days in the field itself.
And when you travel there, do you typically fly into Antofagasta or do you drive somewhere else?
Yeah, usually fly into Santiago and then take a flight about an hour and a half, 2 hours north to Copiapó, which is the main mining town there. Copiapó is kind of the main hub for our project. And it's about an hour and a half drive from our project. And also just to give some context to people, it's relatively close to the water as well. So about an hour and a half west drive, you also have a nice shipping port there. That's kind of what I mean when I talk about these vertically integrated angles where it's not just exploration in this region.
Yeah, Chile is unique in that sense. I mean, everything is relatively close to the water and, the humidity, the difference is unbelievable. Like when you go to the Atacama, I remember, I packed a sandwich myself and my camera guy and stuff like that. And we're there for a few hours. We went to grab the sandwich and it looked like it had come out of a toaster, it was like crispy. For sure. Like every ounce of moisture had been sucked out of the bread. I mean, it tasted fine, but, you got to stay hydrated in that part of the world for sure. This is such an interesting business. You seem super motivated. Was there a lightning bolt moment that, you're an entrepreneur, were you reading something and you just said, you know what, copper, I'm going to go after copper for the next 5 years, 10 years. These things take time, right? What was it?
I think just taking a step back and looking at the world from a first principles philosophy, we need copper. The world is electrifying. Energy is electrifying. Both the transmission of electricity, power, new generation, all these things need copper. And then when you look at the supply side, unlike lithium or some of these other metals and commodities that people talk about, there's a very limited supply of copper, and you can't out-engineer copper right now. There's not really, like, copper and aluminum are these two unique metals that you can't out-engineer as easily as some of these other metals. So all these things combined, plus when I went to the field with the team after, putting in a lot of time, capital personally, et cetera, and getting those great results initially was like, okay, we've got something real here and we're just going to go for it.
I love that, man. I love that. For investors who want to focus on milestones, looking out 6 months down the road, 12 months down the road, what would you have them focus on? Where do you hope to be 12 months from now?
We're going to complete this field program in the next month or two, announce those results Q1. Based on those results, go into drilling as soon as possible, say first half of next year. Both of those are major milestones in terms of the exploration work and announcing those results to market. And alongside that, we're working day and night to build more to this business than just a copper exploration program.
Zach Dolesky, thanks for meeting with us. Super Copper. Good luck.
Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it.